other one go?
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, Sagal, they're up and running.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sagal Fire. And then I got a call from, well, I'm going down to Worley, which is like south of Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, are you coming at 10? I was like, no, I'm in Sandpoint right now.
Yeah.
I could be there at 2. Like I said,
Yeah.
like I planned to.
Right? Like it's later.
But it's been a whirlwind. I mean, so like, I'm Boise, but it was Arkansas on Monday, Denver on Tuesday.
Nice flight. So you got married and left her home.
Exactly. Yeah. That's
why you
yeah.
took her to
Well, then her, my brother-in-law just had their first, and so.
So you gave her busy work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's in the works now.
And so one of the things we do with our videos is then we spread it throughout the community. So I might have post questions, shoot you guys an email. Because this is, we don't, I don't live up here.
Okay.
I don't know why people live here, but a lot of our rural areas, because the makeup of our county, they don't want to travel.
Oh, sure. Right. Yeah,
Colin, this
that
is
makes sense.
on it.
Hi, Colin.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
I
Yeah,
am very eager to listen to see what you have to present for us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here.
Want to
Appreciate
just
it.
get started so we can respect people's time, and if the chairman shows up, he shows up.
Okay, I wasn't waiting for the chairman. I was given a little extra time on it.
Want to wait a couple minutes for a couple more people?
Yes,
Okay.
so.
It's a big county. Yeah, like you're saying.
Well, and
Yeah.
some of the people rely on the sharing the video and giving the comments.
Oh,
And
sure.
They
Yeah.
are, because we're not, for us, it's always the Sandpoint people need to come, like my district is not here. I am in the rural district.
Oh,
So we are in online.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm running upstairs to start our chief meeting.
Okay,
And, but it's live.
Ready to go?
It's unmuted, so I was thinking it was starting at 10.
nope, we're good. We can press play now. I'll just, what's the one that amplifies?
That one,
That one.
anyone will.
Okay.
actually. So, do you want
Hello.
the presentation started now?
Sure, I can. Yeah. Yeah. Why not?
Stay behind the podium, so we got to catch on camera.
Oh, sure. Okay. Okay.
So and then hit the
And
play
then that
button.
guy.
That brings it right online
Wonderful.
for everybody to see.
Okay.
Awesome.
Great.
We're gonna get started here and we're trying a different thing with the microphone. So there is going to be amplification. So when questions come, I'm going to come in the audience so that we don't have to delay time because this is a big topic. We are recording this topic so that we can share it throughout the community because this is something that we've all been talking about. Our growth is significant and what do we do with our infrastructure? So we have here Colin with TischlerBise. This is their specialty of what we're looking at is development impact fees. And is that right for Bonner County? So we do have other people from different areas such as Mayor Connolly. And then we have some people from Dover who are already on the path to doing development impact fees. There's positive and negatives. This is not a sway you one direction or another. It requires that as a community, which is inclusive of the cities, get on board if the county decides to move that direction, or we provide enough information that says we don't want to do it and we need to find a different solution for the impact that development has. So with that being said, I'll introduce Colin and let him take over the presentation.
Thank you, Asia. Yeah, again, Colin McElwee, TischlerBise, based in Boise. So I'm glad I'm up here, like nice direct flight up to Spokane. So it's not too bad. I got about 20 slides and then we can open up for questions and comments. Right here, you're getting a sense of our experience, but also impact fees throughout the state. So up in the north and down into the Treasure Valley where I am, and then out east as well. So becoming a very popular and common revenue source for cities and counties to finance their infrastructure. They've been around about 25 years in the state, really helpful. And I'll get to the details here, but a way for new growth to pay its fair share to accommodate the infrastructure needs. If you're not aware, in 2021, House Bill 389 further limited really the resources that communities have to finance operations and capital. And so it reduced the level that communities can collect on property tax, unfortunately. So really, we saw a spur of impact fees and interest after that as well. So these are one-time payments that new growth pays to communities to mitigate their impact on infrastructure. So typically it's collected at the building permit time, and this would be on new subdivisions, new commercial properties. It's not on a remodel of a home, not on just, if you're expanding your home, not on a new business that were to move into an existing structure. This is on new commercial property, new subdivisions, because they're bringing new demand on your infrastructure, and this revenue source is there to facilitate the new infrastructure that's needed to accommodate that growth. Noted here, there's a little complexity that Asia sort of alluded to is your fire districts and EMS districts, they see the value in this. And so I was just down in Sagal Fire District yesterday to kick off their impact fee study. But unfortunately, the fire districts and EMS districts can't collect their own, again, because it's at the building permit issuance. The counties and cities have the ordinance to do that. So you may see your fire districts or EMS districts or park districts come to you and say, hey, we've developed this study, but we need you to collect our impact fees on our behalf because they can't do it themselves. Not a tax. This is a one-time payment for the one-time costs for new infrastructure. And really it's an agreement between the development community in the city or the county that as they pay the impact fee, they're going to receive a benefit from that. So there's an obligation that if you're collecting this new revenue, that you're going to upsize your facilities, establish new parks, put in new fire stations, build new roads to accommodate that new growth. We have to stay within the parameters of the enabling legislation. And by doing that, we create this nexus study or this report that establishes three things. First, need, benefit, and proportionality. So the first step is we sit down with planning staff to understand growth. We say, hey, you're going to grow by 30% in the next 10 years. And then we go to your department heads like the sheriff or the parks or the roads folks, and talk to them and understand their capital plans to facilitate that new growth. If they don't have any capital plans, then we shouldn't be collecting an impact fee. But if they do have plans to upsize their infrastructure to accommodate growth-related costs, then we're starting to create that nexus. Importantly, there has to be a benefit. And so first, that's by the community sort of timely in a timely fashion using those dollars. And within the enabling legislation, you have 8 years to use the revenue, sort of first in, first out. So if you collect it next year, you have to use those dollars in 8 years. You have sort of an extraordinary circumstances, 11 years to use those revenues, but we really want to make sure that the community is collecting the dollars and providing a benefit with those dollars to new growth. So again, sort of expanding your infrastructure. What we also do, especially in larger counties, is look at service areas. So if you live in the north, we want to make sure that you're still receiving a benefit if you pay the impact fee. So not all the infrastructure is happening in the south. So sometimes we separate the two, creating sort of different pots of money to ensure that there's that nexus, that connection between those that they're paying the fee and receiving a benefit. And then lastly, there's proportionality. So you'll see maybe 5 or 6 different sort of land uses, development types within the fee schedule, because a single family development has a different demand than retail, that has a different demand than industrial. And so you're going to see different sort of fees by the structure type. So, these fees are for new capital. If you've oversized facilities like a wastewater plant or a water treatment site, new growth can pay into that. If it's been scaled for, let's say, 40 years, growth can pay debt service, their fair share of that debt service on that new growth. It can't be used for operations. It can't be used for replacements, can't be used for maintenance. This is really a one-time revenue to accommodate that one-time new demand on your infrastructure. In Idaho, these dollars are kept in separate accounts, interest-bearing accounts. In the last couple of years, if you can earn 5% on those dollars, that's a good investment. You have to use it within 8 years, typically. You need to provide, the community needs to provide an annual report, a sort of financial report of, hey, these are the dollars we collected and this is how we're expending it. You also have to have an advisory committee, and I'll get to that later. You also need a capital improvement plan, which is very important. So a lot of communities, smaller communities, might not have a CIP, and during the report, we would actually establish that, which is required under law, and really is a sort of sets forward that long-term planning for infrastructure, which is important for every community, but also required to collect impact fees. If you adopt a study, it has to be updated every 5 years. And then you can collect for water, wastewater, stormwater, transportation like roads, parks and recreation, and then public safety as well. And we're only looking at infrastructure that has a 10-year useful life or longer. It's not your typical sort of outlay of capital. This is sort of brick and mortar, or you can collect, let's say for like sheriff vehicles, if they're using those for less than or longer than 10 years. Now, I've sort of spelled this out a little bit, but why would you have impact fees? This is really the source of revenue for communities to accommodate that new growth that comes in, to ensure that they're paying their fair share and not raising other revenues to accommodate that growth. It encourages disciplined capital improvement planning, which might be new to the community. So that's a great way for that community to start thinking long-term, not just thinking, next fiscal year, but 5 or 10 years out. What are we going to do to expand our roads? How are we going to expand our parks? There is a element of sort of anti-growth to this because. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
There's, an element that growth is paying their fair share. So if there's anti-growth pressures out there for a community, this helps sort of ease those. And there's an element of, sort of time equity. And so if you've lived in the community for 20 years, you don't want your taxes to go towards new infrastructure to accommodate those that are coming in. You've paid into that infrastructure, and this helps to ensure that your taxes or other revenues are going to the services that you need. There's some misconceptions with impact fees. It's not a silver bullet. It's not appropriate for every community. We want to make sure that you're growing. Also, this doesn't, again, go towards operating or maintenance. And so if you build new parks, if you build new fire stations, if you build new roads, there's still going to be this ongoing O&M cost associated with that infrastructure that impact fees can't go towards. There's also misconception that we can adjust or lower fees for specific development types, and we can't do that. We want to make sure that if we adopt lower than what the study recommends, that it's across the board, that we're not just sort of cherry picking certain developments. Because in that case, you sort of get into legal trouble. Also, there's a misconception that developers hate impact fees. And yes, this is another fee. It's another sort of line item when they're issuing the building permit, but it's something that they can include into their pro formas. So if you're thinking about, the business plan, it's just another line item that they would include in their cost compared to a development agreement process where they don't really know what's going to come out of that. They might have to pay or build a new road, but through the impact fee process, they're already mitigating their impact with the fee. There's different methodologies that we use. Hate to sort of dwell on the details here, but we can look backwards. And so if you've oversized a facility, again, you can growth can pay into that facility. A very common one is called incremental expansion, and that's essentially where we sort of document your current level of service, and that would be park acres per 1,000 residents, facility space per 1,000 residents. And if you adopt that plan, then you're saying, hey, every new resident into the community, we're going to provide today's level of service to that new resident as they come in, and the fee will be able to fund that. And then lastly, we can look forward, which would be a plan-based approach where if we have a transportation master plan, we can sort of set the fee to that future level of service to accommodate that growth. Now we need to include credits in these fees where there's other revenues coming in for that capital, because we don't want to be double charging growth. So if there's debt service, or if you live in a resort town and there's sales tax that's going to capital, we reduce the impact fee to ensure that you're not double collecting. There would also be other credits sort of on the admin side if let's say you had a transportation impact fee and the developer were to build a new road or build a new park, they would get a credit off of that impact fee because they're mitigating their capital demand through that dedication. Kind of a lengthy process, about 3-4 months to sort of get to that final report. We sit down with your planning and zoning staff, your building department staff to understand growth. Then we sit down with the sort of applicable departments to understand their capital plan. We evaluate the methodologies. We look at different credits. We calculate the fee, and then that goes to the advisory committee to get their input. Then that is then presented to county commissioners or city council for their adoption. The report itself can be, about 4 months. And then the adoption process might take 3 months. So this is sort of a 6 to 7 month adoption process. In Bonner County, there's a handful of impact fees already being collected. City of Sandpoint's collecting them. Priest River just sat with Sagal Fire yesterday. They're moving forward with their fire impact fee. Northside Fire just adopted their own, and Pond Array is looking at it, impact fees as well. Further down, you have Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls and Hayden also have their own impact fees. Importantly, as sort of Asia alluded to, is typically we look at infrastructure that's providing a countywide service. And so that would be countywide roads, countywide public safety. And in those cases, you have to incorporate the demand that's coming from those that live within cities and towns. And so when we go through the process, the city and county have to come together to ensure that the county impact fees are being fully funded through being collected within the city to ensure that those CIPs are being fully funded as well. Now, importantly, we can't use impact fees to address current deficiencies. And I actually went through your the transportation CIP. And so if you have, sort of safety issues or bridges that need addressing, that would be considered a current deficiency. So we can't use impact fee dollars to go towards that. It has to be growth related. And so importantly, many of the 2018 transportation items would not be impact fee eligible. Now, this would be a new revenue. So, sort of makes sense that there wouldn't be big new capital on the CIP. We're really sort of addressing the deficiencies to help our current demand. And so through the process, we would probably add more projects, growth related projects to the CIP to address that growth related items. We typically, again, look at county-wide benefiting projects, but if there's sort of hot spots of growth, we might create that service area. So folks in more rural areas might not pay the impact fee. Areas where there's high growth and where the capital needs are, we might just collect in that sort of service area benefit zone to ensure that there's a benefit and you're not overcharging growth that aren't receiving a benefit. And then importantly, we have to go through this nexus study and through public safety. It's a pretty easy approach because there's sort of this ripple effect where, hey, new EMS station in the north is still going to provide benefit to folks in the south, because if you have a big accident or a multi-casualty incidents, there's a ripple effect, and so there's a first response, second response, and third response. So typically on the public safety side, you can do a county-wide benefit analysis. I think I talked to Asia earlier, and again, we can collect for sheriff, we can collect for EMS, we can also address transportation needs as well. Typically that, as I said, the study takes about 5, realistically, maybe 7 months, which in this case isn't and too bad of an issue, because if we were to start the process and get it adopted in the winter time, then developers can start putting those new fees into their pro formas, that they're not being caught off guard by this new fee. And I sort of went through your previous growth, how actually specifically just housing growth, and looking at sort of average impact fees in the region over the last 5 years. If you had impact fees, you would have collected around $3 to $5 million in new infrastructure that could go towards growth related needs. So sort of went through that kind of quickly. Open here for discussion or any questions as well. Yes, yeah, sure, yeah.
So the cities that already provide or have impact fees, it seems like, it doesn't seem like it will be a double whammy for anybody that's going to construct in the city limits. I think that's detrimental to what we're trying to do, which is encourage our growth outside of or in our urban areas and not sprawl all over the place in the county. So I guess I have that concern. We obviously have an impact fee, and we're going through a revision of our impact fee. And it should be done here within the next month or so. So I guess that is a concern. And the other one is I guess maybe, we have parks, we have police, we have our own road and bridge. I'm just not sure what the benefit to the city is. And it's a, we're going to address all those issues in our impact fees. And I guess if you don't mind paying for part of the parks, part of the roads in the city of Priest River, because we're impacted by the county using the county residents using our parks, our streets, and our police, then I guess I'd be all right with it.
Yeah, it's tricky. This is not unique everywhere. I'll tell you, where there's a county impact fee, there's always a discussion of collecting it within cities and towns, where you find more, sort of participation is in services that the city does not provide. So if it's like EMS or fire, or jail, for instance, then there's a lot of overlap because the county's providing that. Folks within cities are still county residents, they still pay county taxes. So that there's more sort of cordialness when it comes to that. Importantly, I would, you can make the case that if you live within towns, you still use county roads, you still recreate on county facilities, those sorts of items. They still provide they still have a demand on county infrastructure. And importantly, the county capital improvement plan can only be fully funded with that corporation. So it's tricky, it's a tough one. There you can still, find some coordination, especially if those county facilities are with, near towns as well. So, we go through that capital improvement plan process to ensure that there's still a benefit, or, sort of slice and dice the county to ensure that, hey, we're only collecting in this area and there's a benefit in this area. We're collecting this area and there's a pot of money going to that area as well. Yeah.
You got to show that correct.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'll walk you.
Hi, thank you for coming. Could you give me an idea of like what percentage, let's say, that you could give to the sheriff if you did impact fees?
That's a good question. I think from definitely like a home builder standpoint, they just see that final number, right? It just says impact, Bonner County, Ada County, Teton County impact fees. But through the study, really you have different buckets of dollars. So it'd be for the sheriff, it'd be for roads, it'd be, let's say parks. Sheriff, it kind of depends. And it all depends on the capital improvement plan, because unless you need a new jail, which is like a heavy infrastructure project, sheriff actually typically is a lower impact fee compared to others, because typically you just need, one sheriff station. You might need another sort of substation out there. You can collect for new patrol cars and new equipment that have a 10-year useful life. So like body armor and weapons and radios typically fall within that. But compared to, road costs, it's usually lower. What that might mean is, let's say $500 for a single family home, typically, let's say, where a road impact fee might be $2,000 to sort of, get a relationship there. Yeah.
So could the money be used for more patrolling of the sheriff in the county?
It can be used to buy that new car and buy the new equipment, but can't be used to pay for their salaries. Yeah. So it's a tricky conversation, because we have this in most communities. Hey, we can get you the dollars for the new capital, right? We can outfit that new patrol officer or sheriff deputy. We can get you dollars for a new jail or a new park, but do you have the ongoing revenues to maintain that? And so there's a sort of right sizing there as well to fit within the realities of a budget. Yeah.
So who decides how those pots get split up? That's one question. Two is, what is the cost? I presume you're here to promote your outfit doing the study. What is the cost of that? And then is the 10-year useful life thing, is that a hard line? Because I don't think a lot of the equipment that a sheriff's deputy or a firefighter uses there's no way it's going to make it 10 years. So is that a hard line, and who makes that?
Yeah. Well, I'll address the last question first. And so the 10 years is a hard line. And unfortunately, especially for sheriff vehicles, they usually run those less than 10 years, so I might be painting a prettier picture than the reality. But back to the first point is, and I wish I had the slide here. I forgot it, but you need to have this impact fee advisory committee, or development impact fee advisory committee. A DFAC is what that acronym would be, and that is made up of 5 folks within the community. 2 of them have to be built within the building industry, so home builders, realtors, and they oversee the study itself. And they also have to meet once a year to review the financials of those special revenue accounts for the impact fees. So, hey, we collected $200,000 this year. If we're expending those dollars, they review the expenditures to make sure that's a growth related impact fee eligible cost. Unfortunately, the service isn't free.
But the presentation is, we want to make sure.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. It worked out because it worked out because I was up here anyways, and I'm in Boise, but it ranges, let's say, if you're looking at one fee, like a fire impact fee for Sagal, let's say, that might be $20,000. We're updating or actually not updating. We're going through the process of adopting new impact fees in Ada County, and that went up to 60. So it depends. It's sort of because there's a level of sophistication, and you have to ensure, as a consultant, we're sort of the middle person between, hey, we have these capital needs, development community, hey, we don't want to be overcharged. There has to be a proportionality here. And then there's also, feedback from the community. Hey, in some communities, we want this fee to be as high as possible. right? Like we want growth to pay as much as possible. Yeah. And we hear that, and so it's sort of this back and forth that you have to play, because if you're out in, Eastern Idaho and Victor and Driggs, where they're building $2 million homes, you can have a $10,000 impact fee, because that's smaller than a drop in a bucket to those folks, right? But there's right sizing that has to occur when you are in a community like this, where you're not building $1 million homes, right? When you're concerned about affordability and those issues too.
We have someone on Zoom with their hand up. Christine, unmute yourself. While she's figuring out Zoom, I do have a question. We have unincorporated and incorporated areas in Bonner County, and we have a lot of growth occurring in the areas that don't have the infrastructure. How does something like this roll out? And is that a possibility to have impact fees in the areas that don't have the infrastructure? Because that reasonably could be in line with Mayor Connolly's comment about the cities are doing impact fees and they have services, whereas the other type of area doesn't have those services.
Yeah, Commissioner, that's a great point. We're sort of talking hypothetically here, right? And it's easier to think about county-wide fees, but if there are real needs, let's say on roads, in specific parts of the county where growth is happening, these impact fees could stay within sort of that service area and not be charged within towns. As long as we're creating that nexus, it gets, the reality is it's a little, there's some nuance there, because roads are expensive, right? They get more and more expensive. It's doubled in the last 3 years. And it's hard to put all of that cost sometimes on the few homes that are being built in that area. So there is that sort of right sizing that needs to occur as well, to make sure we're not extinguishing growth or unfairly burdening new development.
So I don't think our goal is to penalize developers, but to develop in the areas that can absorb that development without the existing people having to pay for that impact on the infrastructure. So in the areas that you have is there another place where it's a county and a city type of an impact tax? Can you give us that description and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, really the best cases are where the county's providing services that the city doesn't, so that's jails or fire and EMS. Sometimes there's sheriff deputies that are contracted within cities as well. It occurs, I'm just thinking Teton County, Ada County, Blaine County, up in Kootenai, or down actually in Kootenai County. All of those fire districts have impact fees because those are services that the cities aren't providing. Those districts are providing that. And so the county and cities came together along with the districts to ensure that there's an agreement put in place that they're collecting on behalf of the fire districts, and those dollars are then transmitted to the districts on a routine basis to make sure that the capital plans are fully funded.
So it is possible to do it, just requires more collaboration with everyone.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's really the easy part is the study. Like we can do, that's what you pay us for. The difficult thing is that sort of adoption process to make sure that your capital improvement plans are fully funded and there's cooperation between all the different jurisdictions that are included in the study.
I walked away from you.
So what happens when you have your study and your plan and you have your CIP, but then maybe there's not as many impact fees collected as you anticipated? And what if you have a large project? Let's say you wanted to do a whole new fire building, but you don't have enough money now. Is that what the difference between the 8 and the 11 years is? Does that give you room to compensate? Because do you give it back after 8 years if you can't accomplish the mission? what happens there?
That's a great question. Yeah. We're getting to the minutia here. So, impact fees aren't right for every community. And so there's a lot of smaller cities and towns and counties across the state that have actually approached us and say, hey, we need every revenue as possible, right? We need, our taxes are being limited by the capital, where you just have growth that's occurring. Inflation has, really scaled the cost of all of our new roads and fire and all that. But if you aren't growing, let's say 10% over 10 years, right? If you're not getting 200 homes in the next 10 years, then as you're collecting that fee, day one, you collect that fee, you're obligated to use those dollars appropriately and going to new capital to accommodate growth. And fire station's a great point, because if it's a salaried positions, that might cost you $2 million a year to operate, and so if you don't have that revenue as well, that's we shouldn't be collecting dollars. And so you do get into a little pickle if you're collecting dollars and not using it appropriately. They just say extraordinary circumstances for that 11 years. I think to that point I think that sort of was written in there because we had, the Great Recession and things really slowed. And so capital planning really got deferred for a while. But we still need new capital. So we sort of extended that a little bit. But to your point, if we don't use it in a timely fashion, those dollars do have to be returned to those that paid. And so again, that's sort of the spot that I'm in, or, as a sort of a advisor and expert, is that, hey, should we be collecting these fees, right? Do we have plans? And we probably have plans, but it's only for one or two different departments, right? And to ensure that day one, there's an obligation, if you start collecting this, that we're going to provide new infrastructure and all the things that come along with that. Oh,
Just 1 second.
yeah, sorry.
Thank you. So you indicated that the natural moment to collect said fees is at the issuance of the building permit. Are there statutory mechanisms whereby one can go back in arrears?
Short answer, no. The
Unanticipated impacts.
Yeah. The report also, along with establishing that nexus and justification for collecting, you're also now quantifying the cost of growth. And so we look at demand, we look at construction costs, CIPs, all of that, right? And we bring that into dollars, and you'll see, hey, every new resident, either tomorrow or yesterday, costs $2,000, right? Or for even just capital, right? And so that also is an information point that is helpful for communities to have that discussion. You can't claw back on development that's already occurred, which is an important point too, because impact fees really are useful before that wave of growth happens, right? And so for communities that defer that capital, defer, then all that capital becomes non-impact fee eligible, And so if you miss that wave, if you get behind the 8 ball too much, then there's less that impact fees can fund. And so it's really important, I'm, Sagal, Worley, later today, even Melba, in Canyon County, they see growth happening, it's moving towards them. And so it's important to get in front of that to capture that revenue for the growth related costs that are coming.
How much is it going to cost for a renewal? Every 5 years, you're suggesting that there is a study has to be redone. So if it's $50K for round one, how much is it for round two and all of the successive iterations?
the same. Sorry, yeah, because it's really a comprehensive analysis of all that you would look at, so we then sit back with your planning staff, with your departments to understand growth, because just yesterday we were talking to Sagal and they said, hey, is this going to sunset anytime? And there's not really a sunset specifically unless you don't have capital plans. So if you build a new fire station, if you build a new road, and 5 years later, hey, we're sort of set right now, then we shouldn't collect an impact fee. Then maybe we hold back for the next 5 years until growth sort of picks up again. But to the question, yes, it's a whole new study, and so they're the same cost. Yeah.
So you're saying that it's really important to plan ahead of growth. And I was wondering if you've ever heard of down but in the Portland area, they have or each city in Oregon has urban growth boundaries. Do you know anything about those?
Yes.
Would they be helpful?
Well, that's a great question. We do, yeah. So impact fees is sort of our bread and butter, but we also do sort of this larger, what's called fiscal impact analysis. And so it looks at capital, but also operating costs and revenues that come with that. Tricky thing, and Washington has it as well, is, the politics, the use of, limitation of personal property and within those boundaries. And so that's a tricky pill to swallow if you are within, anywhere and you own land and want to use it however you feel.
Or it's a zoning issue where you hold to the zoning.
Yes. Yeah.
When you're putting this study together, are you only interacting with planning staff of the county and or the cities, or is there citizen involvement, or how? Because that relationship here is not exactly a healthy one. So citizens need to be involved. So how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, you need to have that development impact fee advisory committee, which is made up of at least 5 citizens within the community.
Excuse me, but
Yeah.
is that as you're developing your study, or is that after it's completed, then you form the citizens advisory?
Because
I'm talking about while you're forming your report.
Yeah. It's required to adopt it. So they're incorporated, that citizen group is incorporated within the study itself. And then every year, at least once a year, they meet to ensure that those dollars are used appropriately. But to that point, that's sort of the minimum that we have to do. If there's larger sort of outreach that is needed, that certainly can be incorporated in the study.
I guess so. To whom do you answer as you're putting this report? Is there a better name for it than report, your study result? To whom do you answer during that process?
Well, so the first sort of touch, with the public is through that advisory committee, the minimum, right? And so if there's larger discussions that need to be had with the public, that can be incorporated prior to sort of results are established. And then, then we get review and input by that citizen group, and that input's incorporated, and then it would go to county commissioners for adoption.
Okay, so the citizen advisory group is formed at the outset of the commencement of your study.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Which is tricky. But you're in a large community, so I don't think that would be an issue, but it's hard sometimes in these smaller communities to get 5 folks that are willing to participate. But I don't think that's the issue here. But it's it causes a little bit, it's another hurdle that we have to go through, which takes more time. But I do think it's important because we can also address public concern in that environment before it goes to public hearing and adoption process. Sorry, one sec. Sorry. Yeah.
5 is a minimum.
Yeah, 5 minimum is 5, and 2 have to be within the building industry. So they, to really get their input. It's helpful to make sure that there's a couple folks on that committee that understand the cost of growth and understand that other revenues are going to have to be raised to accommodate this growth in capital planning. So I'm not the only one fighting off 5 people, they don't want any fees, right? They're home built, no one wants additional fees. But it's helpful to have other folks in the room that would be proponents of the program as well.
I had a question. So reading through your website, you guys mentioned smart cities.
Hmm.
Could you define what that means?
Oh yeah. Well, gosh, I went to planning school 10 years ago. I joked that I wanted to design bike paths, and then, I had a finance degree, and this is, really, what I am passionate about. And it's hard, I guess, if you look up a smart community that ranges, you're going to get 10 different people are going to say 10 different definitions. One of them would be, like your more, development zones, within like Portland and or Oregon and Washington. Really it would be, in my mind, it's a community from a municipal finance side that's sustainable, that you have these one-time fees for one-time costs, but also your ongoing revenues are accommodating and right size to fit your ongoing operation costs. And so to me, it's, from municipal finance side, it's, hey, we're doing all we can to make sure folks are paying their fair share, but also not overpaying, right? They're not existing resident who's lived here 20 years isn't paying for folks who are just coming in.
Does that answer your question about the smart cities?
Yeah.
I think that, to be more direct of what she's going towards, is I think he's talking about the IQ of the city and the efficiency by which it runs. But her question is born out of more of the electronic version of smart city, the camera in the street light type of a smart city, because that is a movement that's also existing. And I think that's what she's wanting to know. Is that the language you're using when you use that term? Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, technophiles, would love, a community that, is observant and can be more maybe efficient in those ways. But in our sense, no, it's a municipal finance. So, being financially sustainable in the way that you're financing capital in operations. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so my question was, is there a way not to give the money back after the 8 or 10 or 11 years, whatever it is? I'm from the Midwest, and I had thought that our impact fees that we had collected, that they were just flat fees, and that you didn't have to give it back. I mean, basically, it's not like after 8 years, those people are going away. They're still there, and the growth is still there. So is there a way to still have that money because that growth is still there?
Yeah. Well, go Pack Go if you're from Wisconsin.
Oh,
but yeah, there you go. Yeah, me too. Unfortunately, short answer, no. You still have to give those dollars back. But that's really another important part of that 5-year analysis is, hey, okay, we've collected for 5 years. Are we using those dollars? Are we just stockpiling it? Impact fees, that term is used differently in different states. So in the Midwest, you're under different state statutory sort of laws. In, let's say, South Carolina, you only have 3 years to use it, so it changes by state, but short answer, if you don't use it in 11 years, you have to give it back. Yeah. Well, 8 years. It says 11 years in extraordinary circumstances, but from our standpoint, we don't want to adopt these fees if you can't use it less than 8 years. I mean, that's sort of a long time because we want to ensure that there's a benefit for those that are paying this fee. Sir.
Yes, sir. Two-part question. So does the statute require that there be some arm's length distance or separation between the development of the impact plan, fee plan, and the panel of advisors? So the other way to ask that question is, can you have a homegrown impact plan? Or does the statute require that you or someone like you develop said plan? My second question is, do you have competition?
I'll do the second one first. So, it's TischlerBise Galena. And so we did have competition 2 years, there was a colleague of mine, Ann Westcott, who was part of Galena Consultancy, and she retired a couple of years ago. And so we merged together with her staff and our staff. Not too much competition. There's other engineering, sort of smaller engineering firms that are dipping into this in Idaho. Nationally, there's other firms that do this. The tricky thing, sort of going to that first question, is these fees go under a lot of scrutiny, and it's required, and so you really need to have this lengthy report and expertise to establish that nexus. It hasn't happened in about 15 years, but communities can be sued by folks that are paying the fee if it's not done appropriately. So you really, as a consultant, I recommend having a consultant. No, but you need to have a expertise to ensure that you're doing this properly, and incorporating all these sort of aspects that we're discussing.
Are you indemnified?
Indemnified.
Indemnify us?
Oh, potentially. How do you mean? In what way? Yeah.
You said that if you don't develop a plan
Yeah.
appropriately, you would get sued.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you indemnifying the county?
Well, we work collaboratively. And so, we put together this report, ensure that there's a nexus. And if there's a challenge, we're there to help with proving that, the report is done appropriately. I don't want to stand on here and say yes or no, but we nationally, so we haven't been legally challenged in Idaho. There's been a couple of our studies in South Carolina that have been challenged, but we've never lost that challenge. We, in some ways we're conservative in our approach for those reasons. We're not too aggressive, but there's a real reason that you want an expert in, understanding the best practices of these studies to ensure that there's no legal concerns collecting this new program.
All right, we have someone online, and then we'll go to Randy.
Reg Crawford.
Yep.
Reg Crawford. Could you talk to the relationship between impact fees and the county's planning code? For example, in our county from the years 2017 to 21, there were 4,600 new parcels created in the county, and only about 150 went through the short plat process, and about 175 went through the subdivision process. So by far the majority of parcels, or about half, thousands, are created using types of land divisions that are approved administratively without being subject to these design standards. How could you develop a relationship with the county planning department that is resistant to create code that stops these types of land divisions, or funnels them into something that could be used for impact fees? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting, impact fees, if you just look at it, you think it's just one line item that, like a building permit or fire inspection, but it really opens up these larger discussions. And, this would fall under the land use code ordinance. And there is some administrative burden to these programs to ensure, hey, when a building permit's issued, we understand that's a single family home versus retail versus, office or industrial or self-storage. So, we try and stay within those parameters. That larger discussion can occur during the sort of that outreach. But we're really just trying to hone in on impact fees explicitly. Yeah.
So Randy Stoltz for the record. So to get back to this gentleman's question about indemnity, I'm going to draw an analogy, and you tell me if I'm pretty much on point. If I understand your relationship with the county would be analogous to an accountant who prepares a tax return, you get audited, and the accountant goes to the IRS with you. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yeah. And we would, we have insurance policies and those sorts of things to help that. The importantly is during sort of that whole process of adoption and the study and the nexus is a level of education too with staff to ensure that we're using this appropriately and that we're not collecting for something that we're not going to use or it's going to something that's not within the law. And so, we try and work hand in hand, and that's our hope, and importantly, there's a 5-year update that has to occur and there's a cost associated with that. But I just said it yesterday, I say it every time, once we get that adopted, the county or the city or the fire district can, just pick up the phone and call me for free. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to charge you per hour. I'm here to help, and so if there's questions of how we use this or how should we charge this with this specific development, call me and, I'm on Mountain Time. I always get it goofy that you guys are up here in Pacific Time, but but yeah, just you just ring me for free and I'm here to help.
I have a question. What about RV parks? So let's say I have 5 acres and the county allows me to put an RV park on my existing 5 acres. How would that affect impact fees? Because there is so much extra pressure on the infrastructure, but
it's tricky. Yeah. We've dealt with this in other counties in the state because it is only charged when the building permit is issued. And so if you're doing an RV park, there may or may not be sort of those building permit processes like a new home. If you're just putting down a slab or setting up like electricity or utilities. Now that study sort of quantifies in dollars what, a new home's impact is. And so that would give sort of a report in hand to help commissioners maybe go through that development agreement to try and capture some of that new impact that's occurring.
Decides on the 5 on this committee to run this thing.
That's appointed by the commissioners. Yep.
How do you apply for that?
Oh, they would just reach out like any other board or commission. Yeah.
And on this is
take
just a
applications.
discussion of what our available options are. As we've looked at planning and we've looked at our growth, the question of should we have impact fees has come up a lot. So he's giving us a presentation about that process. If there was a consensus that you were going to move forward, that would be something that we would have to probably vote on. And I think it'd be reasonable if it was treated similarly to how we do other commissions on the, and whether or not you need more than 5, because if 2 slots are builders, I think you need more people just without a specific action. So anybody else with a question? Planning has no questions? Okay.
We're currently doing impact fees for North Side and Spirit Lake.
Yeah.
I think it's working really well.
Yeah, again, there's a lot of folks across the state, but up here that are seeing the value of growth paying its fair share through these impact fees, so that other revenues don't have to be raised on the backs of current residents. And we, continue to get limited by the revenues that we can raise by the state as well. So this is really solving sort of at least one aspect of growth, but helping to fund those infrastructure needs.
I want you to give a comment on timeline. If I recall, there was one county that moved forward with the study and then there was a board change and then the study was aging. Can you kind of give that timeline of what it looks like? Because we need to know if you start the process and you've put out the money that it starts aging.
Yeah. So, November is always, sometimes a hurdle that we have to get through as like commissioners or city council changes. These reports, let's say Ada County, they did a study 2 years ago. Elected officials changed and really after, let's say 18 months, the study sort of goes stale. Like you really should reevaluate the needs and priorities of officials. And just, even just the fact of inflation, right? We need to account for that too. So if it goes 18 months, 2 years, there's a lot of delay. We would probably have to redo the whole study. Timeline wise, right? We can typically get the report done in 3 to 4 months, and then we have that in hand, and then it just might take 3 or 4 months to sort of get over that last finish line.
Okay, thank you. Can I squeeze past you?
So I'm the planning director. So I've had a conversation with many other water sewer districts, fire departments, fire districts. Is there any kind of economies of scale? Let's say we team up, if you will, with a number of these other taxing districts to create one big report versus just looking at the county services?
Yeah, there's it would be separate reports, but there's definitely economies of scale because from planning perspective, we need to understand what growth that's occurred and growth that's going to occur. And so having multiple jurisdictions at once is really helpful. And then so that at the beginning and then on the last part, there's a lot of economies of scale there and cost savings, let's say. And I'm coming up here for Sagal and other fire districts as well. So there's even just a sense of the admin cost to get up here there's savings there. Yeah. So there's that's really, we try and do this in like one fell swoop. It's also important too, from a community perspective, that we're not just sort of trickling in, that we have this larger discussion all at once and include that community input.
There's someone online, Miss Miller.
Yes, I just want to clarify, if the county were to adopt an impact fee study, can they impose that on the other jurisdictions that are located within the county, or would each of the individual jurisdictions have to sign on and agree to collect those fees?
Yes, they would have to sign on to collect the county fees. Importantly, unless we sort of slice this up into different service areas that don't include incorporated areas, we typically look at county-wide facilities like a jail, let's say, and that jail is being there's demand from population within cities as well, and so we have to incorporate that demand in our nexus study. And if there isn't a collection within cities, then there's essentially a funding gap that has to be made whole by other revenues.
So they could choose to accept a portion of it, say the jail impact fee, and collect that. But we, for instance, have our own police department. We collect our own impact fees. And so we obviously wouldn't want to be paying into all of that. And on the flip side, the county, city residents may use the county road systems and things like that. I would argue that our city has way more county residents that are using our road system. So it kind of goes both ways.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. It's a tricky thing. It's not a silver bullet, right? There's going to be instances where there's capital infrastructure that isn't being costs that aren't being captured by this revenue, but it really helps to at least solve a good majority of these costs.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you
Thank
for
you.
coming down and giving us the presentation.
Yeah.
At our last commissioner chat of this month, we'll kind of be able to kind of come back to doing a huddle to see what we thought about the presentation and then see if that's something Bonner County would be even interested in. I think one of the biggest takeaways is we need to have these cities on board with such a plan because we don't want to double tax people and we don't want to discourage development. We just want development in the right direction. So with that, we'll end our presentation on development impact fees. Thank you guys for coming. And you can eat something here too.
Thank you.